of the most striking things about Greg is that he is really something of a Renaissance man. He is widely read. He is deeply passionate about the world in which he lives, and he wants to make a difference, not only in Idaho and America, but across the world.
Greg was a graduate student at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and he met Scott Jones. Greg had been studying the divestiture of AT&T and how the Baby Bell operating companies were not allowed to provide certain services such as voicemail. And he had a vision that that ban on the Baby Bells would be lifted and there would be no product available that could provide enhanced services like voicemail to entire cities. And he described that to Scott, and Scott said, well, I'm studying parallel processing at MIT and I know how to do that. I could make that happen. So they decided to start a company.
I think they believed they were onto something very big. Somehow they maxed out several credit cards and plugged along. Literally, Greg talks about not letting Scott out of his bedroom while he worked on all of the high-tech part of this. He'd slide pizzas under the door. And they sweated bullets for several years until they finally landed their first contract. That's when they knew, when they landed that first contract and to place their first voice messaging hardware and software with them, that they realized they had something big and they'd made it.
Acquired a small company started by 3 Kenyans called Africa Online and started doing internet services in developing countries. And, Greg, always wanting to do something very big, decided, why don't we just buy Prodigy from IBM and Sears? And the whole thing became Prodigy, with a lot of focus on developing countries.
Greg saw things differently. He did things differently. He did it in a very charming way, and it had a certain magnetism about him, even as a very young man, that of course continues to this day. Very few people would think of building such a large museum with such aggressive programming in a largely rural region like eastern Idaho. But Greg did.
He's been a tremendous champion of human rights, not only here in Idaho, but across the nation, as reflected, for example, in his establishment of the Carr Institute for Human Rights at Harvard.
But I've worked pretty closely with Greg with the Carr Foundation. He formed the Carr Foundation, mostly here in Idaho, with projects that we have done here in Idaho, such as the Museum of Idaho. He was a principal donor, and we helped build the Anne Frank Memorial here in Boise, and we were instrumental, and I say we, Greg was responsible for purchasing the old Aryan Nation compound in northern Idaho and getting that out of those hands and then donating it back to the College of Northern Idaho.
We had talked about the project that we were doing, the Anne Frank Human Rights Memorial, and he thought it sounded very interesting. And I had coffee with him, and he gave us $1 million.
What he's up to, because you have this national park that was completely destroyed. I mean, to the point where there were a couple warthogs running around the place, and that was about it. First, there was the war for independence from Portugal. Mozambique was a Portuguese colony, and there was the war for independence. And then as soon as the war for independence was over, there was a civil war that began. And for the next 15 years, the park was literally the epicenter of that war. For some reason, he saw something different. He didn't just see a destroyed place. He saw the possibility of what Gorongosa could be again.
We hire a lot of those people for jobs in our national park. We've hired about 400 so far. And this is what's been amazing for me to see. The first couple of months' salary they save up, and many of them, the first thing they buy is a piece of technology. They buy a smartphone, and they get a little solar panel to charge it, and all of a sudden they're connected to the whole world. They're not only communicating with friends and family far away, but they're on the internet, they're learning, they're dreaming about places they want to go.
I mean, over the last 5.5 years, Zoo Boise's contributed $1 million to wildlife conservation. And Gorongosa has received about 100,000 of that. And now we're going to take it to the next level. Our next venture that Greg and I have been talking about is to build a Gorongosa National Park exhibit at Zoo Boise, because it's such an incredible story of what's happening over there. And Greg is so proud of the fact that he is from Idaho. You know, we talked about let Zoo Boise tell your story and tell the story of Gorongosa to the people here in Idaho.
It became very clear to me that not only is he a very bright guy, really brilliant, and a wonderful innovator, but in fact he has a heart of gold. He is a great spirit. He has a wonderful soul, and that combination of traits and characteristics, in my mind, makes him one of the most incredible human beings that I've ever met.
That I admire most about Greg as he goes about his life and doing the impactful things that he's done. Behind all these philanthropic efforts is such a great and sincere optimism, an optimism about how we can make our Earth better, how we can interact with each other better.
Then to see somebody who's so humble about the whole thing, he doesn't want to take the credit, he doesn't want to take the spotlight. So it's been a true honor and a pleasure to work and know Greg and work with him.
I think Greg will look back and quite frankly say how he engaged and treated and loved his family will be his greatest accomplishment. His immediate family, but then the broader family. And that will be what Greg will believe is his greatest, most successful accomplishment.